Okay, so picture this. You're at work, on the company Wi-Fi, sending emails, browsing the web. You see that little lock icon in your browser, and you feel safe, right? You trust that everything's secure, private. But what if it's not? What if someone is sitting right there on that same network, watching everything you do? Well, today, we're going to peel back the layers on a really clever, kind of scary network attack known as the man in the middle. And that really brings us to the big question, doesn't it? I mean, if your data is encrypted and you're on a modern, supposedly protected network, how in the world can a hacker just read your messages? It sounds like it should be impossible. But the truth is, it's a fundamental flaw in the very way our networks are designed.
You know, the best way to understand how this works is to actually follow a story. So let's imagine this disgruntled, really tech-savvy employee at a company we'll call Frobozco. They just found out they're getting laid off. And, well, they've decided to see just how much damage they can do on their way out. This is basically a classic red team exercise, where the good guys pretend to be the bad guys to find the weaknesses in a system.
All right, so our story kicks off inside the Frobozco office, right there on their local network. Now, like pretty much any modern office, it's what's called a switched network. And that's supposed to give everyone a pretty solid layer of security and privacy. But, as we're about to find out, that security can be a bit of an illusion.
So, to really get why this is possible, we got to take a quick trip back in time and look at how networks have evolved. See, back in the day, networks used these things called hubs. A hub was, well, it was dumb. It basically just shouted every piece of data to every single computer on the network. It was like a giant party line where anyone could pick up and listen in. Modern networks, on the other hand, use switches. And switches are way smarter. A switch actually figures out which computer is which and sends data only to the computer that's supposed to get it. It turns that party line into a private phone call.
Okay, so that brings us right to the core of the problem for our hacker, right? If the switch is so smart and it's only sending data to the right person, how can they possibly intercept stuff meant for, say, their boss? They can't just plug in their laptop and listen in like you could on those old hub networks. They need a way to trick the system.
And this is where the real cleverness of the attack comes in. The key isn't to break the switch, it's to fool it. Our attacker is about to use a technique called ARP spoofing to basically poison the network's trust system, and in doing so, they're going to place themselves right smack in the middle of everyone's conversations. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty of the attack, we need to talk about something called ARP, which stands for Address Resolution Protocol. The easiest way to think about it is like the network's address book. When your computer wants to talk to another device, like the office router to get to the internet, it knows the IP address, but it needs the physical hardware address, the MAC address. So it shouts out using ARP, hey, who has this IP address? And the correct device shouts back its MAC address. The key thing to remember here, the absolute most critical part, is that this entire system is built on trust.
So how does our attacker exploit this trust? It's actually pretty simple. They just start broadcasting their own fake ARP messages. They basically start yelling at every other computer on the network. Hey everyone, if you're looking for the internet gateway, guess what? That's me. Here's my address. And because ARP is just built to trust these messages, all the other computers go, oh, okay, and they update their address books. Even the smart network switch gets fooled, and it starts sending all the internet-bound traffic straight to the attacker's computer.
And boom, just like that, it's done. The attack is a success. Our hacker has basically become the network's rogue postman. Every single piece of data heading for the outside world now goes through their machine first. They can read it, they can change it, or they can just let it pass through like nothing ever happened. They are officially the man in the middle.
Okay, so our attacker now controls all the traffic. The big question is, so what? What can they actually do with all this power? Well, this is where things get really interesting, because there's a whole playbook of attacks that are now on the table, from just quietly listening in to actively changing what people see on their screens. We can break it down into three main types. The first, and simplest, is just good old-fashioned eavesdropping, just passively listening. If anyone sends anything unencrypted, like a username or a password, the attacker can just grab it. Easy. Then you've got replay attacks. This is where they capture a legitimate request and then just send it again and again to get the same result. And finally, you have the most powerful one, insertion attacks. This is where they actually change the data as it's flying past. This is a perfect example of a replay attack. Just look at this URL. Imagine it's from a simple web app for sending an eTard. So a user logs in, they pick a card, they write a message, but the final send button just creates this one long URL that has all the information in it. An attacker just has to capture that single URL. Then they can just paste it into their own browser and hit enter over and over, sending that same e-card again and again without ever needing the password or going through all the steps.
All right, now for an insertion attack. This is where it gets wild. So, our hacker knows the company execs are glued to the internal stock ticker for Frobas Co., which has the symbol FZCO. As the data for that web page is flowing through the attacker's computer, it's totally normal. Nothing's wrong with it.
But with just a simple little filter, our attacker can change that data on the fly. So before the web page even loads on the executive screen, that symbol FZCO gets swapped out for OND. The exec is probably having a heart attack thinking the company is ruined, but the actual data on the server is completely fine. It's a perfect and pretty scary example of how you can manipulate what someone sees by changing data in transit.
So everything we've talked about so far has been about unencrypted data. But what about the secure stuff? You know, the websites with HTTPS, the secure logins, what happens then? Well, this is kind of like the final boss for our attacker, and beating it means breaking the very foundation of trust that holds the internet together.
To get this, we need a super quick crash course in something called public key cryptography. Here's the deal. Everyone gets a public key. You can share this with the whole world, it doesn't matter. The best way to think of it is as an open padlock. You can give copies of this padlock to anyone who wants to send you a secret message. They put their message in a box, snap your padlock on it, and now it's locked.
And why can only you open it? Because you, and only you, have the private key. This is the one and only key that can open your padlock. You never share it with anyone, ever. So people can use your public padlock to lock messages all day long, but only you, with your secret private key, can ever unlock them and read what's inside. This simple idea is basically the foundation for almost all secure communication online.
So, how does our attacker, let's call her Eve, get around this? It's genius, really. She attacks the moment the keys are exchanged. So, let's say Alice wants to talk securely to Bob. She asks for Bob's public padlock. Eve, our attacker in the middle, intercepts that request. But instead of giving Alice Bob's padlock, she gives Alice one of her own padlocks. Then she does the exact same thing in the other direction when Bob asks for Alice's key. So now Alice and Bob think they're locking messages for each other, but they're both actually using Eve's padlocks. So Eve just sits in the middle, intercepts every message, unlocks it with her private key, reads it, locks it back up with the correct padlock, and sends it on its way. Alice and Bob are having what they think is a totally secure conversation, and they have no idea Eve is reading every single.
Now, your computer is supposed to catch this. It's supposed to warn you. When you connect to a server using a secure tool like SSH, and the key, the padlock, suddenly changes, you get a big, scary warning message like this one. This is basically your computer screaming at you, hey, the padlock you just got doesn't match the one you used last time. Something is very wrong. It's a huge, flashing red sign that a man-in-the-middle attack could be happening right now.
So there you have it. Our hacker has listened in, replayed actions, changed data, and even cracked open secure encrypted traffic. So why does all this matter? Why is this so important? Because at the end of the day, the weakest link in this whole security chain, it isn't the technology, it's us.
These attacks work so often because, let's be honest, we've all been trained to ignore security warnings. Think about it. How many times have you seen one of those browser security errors? You know, maybe a website certificate expired or something. It's usually just some harmless mistake. So what do? We learn to just click Advanced, then proceed anyway, because we just want to get to the website. And that exact habit, that warning fatigue, is what attackers are counting on. They know we'll just click through to accept their fake malicious certificates.
And really, that's the most important thing to take away from all this. That warning message from your browser, the one that's so easy to just ignore and click past, that is often the only thing standing between your private data and an attacker. It's not just a friendly suggestion, it is literally your last line of defense.
So the next time you see one of those warnings pop up, I want you to just pause for a second and ask yourself this. When you click Proceed, who are you really trusting? The website you think you're going to, or the potential man in the middle who's quietly telling you that everything is fine?